So my name is John Scharbach. I am a member down the street at Providence Church. I also lead a community group there. And I recently had a medical procedure done, so I'm hopped up on steroids right now. And so if I get really, really fiery, you can blame those. Let's just start off today. We're in the book of Mark, and we've been working through it chapter by chapter, verse by verse. And we're going to pick up today in Mark 35, or Mark 4. I have a regular person Bible. Mark 4, verse 35. So let's just start there. It says, "On that day, when evening had come, he," that's to say Jesus, "he said to them, 'Let us go across to the other side.' And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. And the other boats were with him, and a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?' And he awoke, and he rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.' And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said to them, 'Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?' And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, 'Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?'" So before we start, ask God, Lord, would you please send your Spirit to give us illumination, that you would please plant your word in our hearts. Please give us obedient hearts to receive it and to accept it and to obey it. We pray that you would pull back the veil to help us see your spiritual reality clearly. We hope that you would shine your light, the light of the glory of your Son, Jesus Christ, into our hearts, and give us a vision of your greatness, your steadfast love, your faithfulness, and your glory. So that last question in the text, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" It's sort of like, that's actually kind of the core question of the first 8 chapters of Mark. Who then is this? And Mark gives us the answer. It's not like it's not a secret. He gives us the answer in the first verse of the first chapter, that this is the Christ, the Son of God. But the question is, what does that mean? What does it mean that he's the Christ and the Son of God? And Mark is sort of unrolling that answer slowly for us over the course of the book. And Jesus is unrolling that answer for us over the course of the book. And the reason is, I think, that you can't really put new wine in old wineskins. You can't get these big theological ideas and shove them into your old categories. First, what you need to do is start to deconstruct and reshape the old categories before you can fill them with new content. Otherwise, we'll just kind of shape Jesus into whoever we want him to be. And so there's always a not and there's always a but. Jesus is not this, but Jesus is that. And that, I think, is kind of the story of the first 8 chapters of Mark. And so what answer or answers is Mark starting to unroll for us here? Well, there's a lot of different answers. We're going to focus on 3 in the interest of time. Number 1, that Jesus is a missionary. Number 2, that Jesus is trusting. And number 3, that Jesus is trustworthy. He's a missionary, he's trusting, and he's trustworthy. So let's dive right in. Jesus is a missionary. He's been sent by his Father on a mission. And so the context here is that he's been sort of like hanging out in Galilee, which is sort of to the north of Israel, or the northern part of Israel, and he's been preaching, and he's been healing, and he's been teaching, and he's been doing all these great things, and all these people are coming to him and listening to him, and we've just spent a whole chapter of him just teaching this big crowd that's gathered around him. And, if he were like me, he might be content to stay there. He's having a big impact, he's loving people well, he's doing good works, he's building a really big church. But notice what happens in verse 35. He says, "On that day, when the evening had come, he said to them, 'Let us go across to the other side.' And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was, and the other boats were with him." This is one notable aspect of Jesus' ministry. in the Gospel of Mark, but really in all the Gospels, that he keeps moving around. He doesn't really stay in one place. And he could stay in Galilee and he could raise a big army and then kind of march on Jerusalem. He could, we know from John's Gospel that he could just call down 12 legions of angels, cast the Romans out, restore Israel to their Solomonic glory. He could make Galilee a sort of heaven on earth where there's no disease, there's no sickness, everyone's being nice to each other, there's no sadness, there's not even any death. But yet we see that whenever he draws this large crowd, the crowd kind of wants to make him king, and he's kind of like, nah, I don't think so, and he goes somewhere else. And the question is why? Well, we actually don't get the answer in this text. This text just raises the question for us. But one of the texts that does answer that question for us is in Luke chapter 4, in the second half of verse 42 and 43. And that's kind of describing a similar situation where it says, and the people sought him and came to him, and they would have kept him from leaving them. But he said to them, I must preach the good news of the kingdom of God to other towns as well, for I was sent for this purpose. He was sent for a purpose. He's a missionary, which just means sent. And so let's take a moment to meditate upon this idea that he was sent for this purpose, and that means he has to keep leaving these towns. We have this old category, maybe, of the Messiah, this Jesus guy is going to come. He's going to make us healthy, wealthy, and wise. He's going to restore Israel to its glory. Things are going to be great. And it's almost as if we're kind of thinking of Jesus sort of as this great sage or this great problem solver, or even a sort of spiritual hospital where he goes around, he's dispensing the healings, and everyone's like, oh, great. And we want to try to change his focus. We want to take his focus off of his Father's mission, this idea that he's sent to proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. And instead we want to take and kind of sort of force them into our own little agendas, our own little lives, maybe our politics or our plans and our designs that we want to be the ones that set the agenda. We want to say, no, you stay here. You don't worry about that gospel thing. You stay here and keep fixing us. And so that's the old category. What's the new category? It's not that, but what is it? Well, the but is that Jesus came to set us free from sin, Satan, and death. So that he can return one day, and rather than creating this little pocket of the kingdom of heaven in Galilee, he can recreate the whole universe and the whole kingdom of heaven with this great host of redeemed believers. Listen to what he says in Luke chapter 4, verse 18 and 19. And here he's quoting from Isaiah 61. He says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and the recovering of the sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So yes, Jesus is, he's setting us free, he's giving sight to the blind, he's liberating the oppressed. Yes, all that's absolutely true. But notice how he's doing it according to these verses. He's doing it by proclaiming the good news of the gospel, the very power of God for salvation. And so it's not just about this world. It's not about kind of what we can see and what we can feel and what we can touch and what we can influence. It's not even about like people or politics necessarily. It's about battling the powers of sin, Satan, and death. And so this is what the Apostle Paul says about it in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. He says, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities. And here I think rulers and authorities means like the spiritual rulers, the spiritual authorities, because of what comes next. He says, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. So David Brainerd was an 18th century American Puritan. And he's living kind of at the time of the Great Awakening, which is Jonathan Edwards or whatever. I think Jonathan Edwards is about a generation older than him. And his life was characterized by great suffering. So at 9, his father dies. At 14, his mother dies. Gloriously at 21, he's converted to Christ, and shortly thereafter enrolls at Yale, which is a seminary at the time. And a year later, he contracted tuberculosis, which is a very serious disease even today, and it was much more serious back then. And so he had to take some time off from Yale, and he came back to Yale. And then he was, shortly thereafter, he was expelled because he was too zealous for the gospel. He was like causing problems for them. And he was this very gifted preacher. Everyone seemed to understand that, but when you get expelled from Yale in the 18th century, it precludes you from being a minister anywhere. Like, you're legally forbidden from being a minister in Connecticut. And so he gets commissioned to go be a missionary instead. So God kind of interrupts his plans and sends him off to be a missionary instead to certain Native Americans in the area. And unlike a lot of his contemporaries, he actually has a great deal of success ministering to the Native Americans. He seems to have a very tender heart for them. And he ends up, for example, establishing a church among the Delaware of 130 people, which is pretty sizable. And so because of this great success and faithfulness, the word kind of gets out. And now all these congregations back home are like, oh no, come on back, be our minister. Okay, you've proven yourself over there, with that, but okay. And he's like, well, no, I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to continue doing my missionary work. And he chose not to return to his homeland, but instead he chooses to continue proclaiming the gospel. And listen to what he says about why he did it. He writes this in his diary. He says, I could have no freedom in the thought of any other circumstance or business in life. All my desire was the conversion of the heathen, which just means unbeliever. And all my hope was in God. God does not suffer me to please or comfort myself with the hopes of seeing friends, returning to my dear acquaintances, or enjoying earthly comforts. In other words, he chooses to pour out his life in service of others, in service of God's gospel, and helping save these people, and being an instrument for God saving these people, really. And he forsakes the promise of worldly comforts and worldly companionship. And so what do we do with these two examples? We have with Jesus, we have kind of David Brainerd illustrating this a little bit. Well, I think here's what I think the answer is. I think the answer is that we don't let other things crowd out our zeal for proclaiming the gospel. That we all have some sort of worldly agendas or some sort of worldly goal. Maybe it's a personal goal. Maybe it's the goal like getting the job or getting the spouse or getting to know the right people. Or maybe it's a good goal, like this is like a political goal, not political in the sense of partisan, but political in the sense that it affects all of us. Maybe it's helping the poor. Maybe it's liberating people from political or legal oppression. Maybe it's helping to teach people to see evil for evil and good for good. And I chose those things because those are specifically called out as good things in the Bible. Those are good goals in the Bible that we should be working towards. But they're good goals just like healing the sick and teaching about the kingdom, just like Jesus is doing in Galilee. But I think this text is showing us in part that these are not the ultimate goal. Or rather, these goals will be more fully and perfectly accomplished by God in bringing in his kingdom than they will be by us trying to build our own version of the kingdom of heaven here on earth. And so if we let them become ultimate things, they'll start to crowd out and distract us from the gospel and the real work of God in salvation. And so we need to be willing to prioritize the gospel and to keep moving forward to other towns, so to speak. And so like Jesus, we need to keep holding on to these things, yes, but holding them in right priority. And we need to, like Jesus, we need to keep the gospel preeminent. And that means, yes, pursuing righteousness, especially the righteousness of God revealed in the gospel. And yes, it means working against suffering, especially the eternal suffering that comes from separation from God. And yes, it means working against oppression, especially the spiritual oppression of sin, Satan, and death. And so how do we keep the gospel preeminent in our lives? Well, listen to these verses from Hebrews chapter 3, starting in verse 12. The author of the Hebrews writes, "Take care, brothers, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. But exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin." And so what I want to pull out of these verses is, number one, that our default posture I think, is to be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. That sin kind of comes in, whispers, and hey, just focus on this. Don't worry so much about that. Those people are weird over there at the church. Just, maybe go on Sundays and check the box, but hey, the real stuff's over here. That's the default state of our heart. And one of the ways that the Bible identifies to combat that is life together. That, you notice he says, exhort one another, right? That it may be that today you're having a really bad day and I'm having a great day, or vice versa, in terms of our relationships in terms of our focus on the things that really matter, on setting our minds on the things that are above. And we can exhort each other. And this is not like oh, we're going to do this once a week sort of thing. We're going to commit our lives to the rhythms of the daily and weekly rhythms of the Christian life. We're going to saturate ourselves with God's truth and with other people that believe God's truth. And those people are going to help encourage and exhort us and carry us through to the end. That these people are instruments that God is using to preserve us on the right path. So this is sort of the missionary work of Jesus. He's going to continue moving to this next town. Right? He's got some plans on the east side of the Sea of Galilee, and he's sent by his Father to proclaim the good news, so he sets off to continue doing that. But first we have to get across the Sea of Galilee, which brings us to the next point, which is that Jesus is trusting. That Jesus knows that his heavenly Father has a plan for him, and he trusts him. So to set the scene, they set out, and then in verse 37, it says, a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. This is not a good situation to be in. Obviously, you're in this tiny little fishing boat on the Sea of Galilee. There's apparently pretty strong storms there, and it's filling up, and what's going on? And so, but notice how Jesus is reacting to this in verse 38. It says, but he was in the stern, which is to say the back of the boat, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And so, look, it's important, and then probably the main point of the text, yes, that Jesus can calm the storm. And so we'll get there. But notice what he's doing before that. He's asleep in the back on a cushion. He's so calm, he's so unaffected by what's going on, that he's just asleep. He's not, hey, here's my chance, I'm going to prove to the disciples I'm the Son of God, I'm going to go do some great stuff. It's not, hey, don't worry, I know this storm is really bad, but you've got me and I'm God, so I'll fix this problem for us. He's so unconcerned about what's going on that he can't even really be bothered to wake up. And he's not unconcerned merely because I think he knows that he has the authority over the storm. He seems to be unconcerned because he doesn't even think that the storm is really a problem or really a threat. He seems to be saying that they shouldn't even be afraid of the storm at all. I say that in part because of verse 40, which says, he said to them, why are you afraid? Have you still no faith? And so the question is, okay, so they're afraid, obviously, and it seems like for good reason. Why is Jesus not afraid? Well, I think in part because he knows that fear is fleeting. Let's take a look briefly, and it'll be up on the screen, so you don't have to turn there. Matthew chapter 10, verse 28 and 29. He says, do not fear those who can kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Don't fear those things. Rather, fear him who can destroy both body and soul in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. Everything that happens in this world is in God's control. God has absolute control over everything. A sparrow doesn't fall from the sky unless apart from the will of God. A raindrop, let alone a storm, doesn't fall from the sky apart from the will of God. Every situation, every storm, every setback, every suffering is part of God's plan, that he's molding it and he's redirecting it for our good. This is not to say that God is working all this evil in the world. No. We know from Genesis chapter 50, for example, where Joseph has been sold into slavery and has led this really harsh, suffering-filled life because of the sin of his brothers. But he says, what does he say? He says, well, you meant it for evil to his brothers, but God meant it for good. So we have these people that have committed this great evil against him. And they're not that they're not responsible, but that God is using this and God means this and is superintending this process for our good. So here we have this old category that God's going to just fix every difficulty for us. He's going to keep us from suffering. He's going to help us lead our best life now. There'll be oil everywhere, kind of to use the language like there's milk, honey, there's oil, there's all this stuff. And that's sort of the old category that he's beginning to do away with. The new category is, well, for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. And so what do we know? Well, we know that to live is gain, right? Because we get to continue in our fruitful ministry with others. We know that to die is Christ, meaning we get to be eternally united with our Savior. We know that the sufferings of this present age are not worth comparing with the glory that's to be revealed to us. We know that this light momentary affliction is preparing us for the eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. And we know that for those who are united with Christ by faith, we have nothing to fear in this world. We do not fear what can merely kill you. Instead, fear the Lord only. So, back to David Brainerd for a moment. At 28, he's having this great ministry, and his tuberculosis kind of flares back up. And so he has to leave the mission field entirely. And so he spends the next year of his life in Jonathan Edwards' home. So Jonathan Edwards is like a very prominent 18th century American theologian. And he grew very close to Edwards' daughter, Jerusha. It's a great name. If you're considering what to name your daughter, Jerusha is a good one. So they get engaged, but they're actually never married because shortly thereafter, at the age of 29, which is younger than me and I think younger than a lot of you, David Brainerd dies. He goes to be with the Lord. And then shortly thereafter, Jerusha dies as well. And Jerusha is, I think, Jonathan Edwards, I think, had 12 children with his wife Sarah, and I think Jerusha is the first one to have died. So this is kind of really hits him. And so her father, Edwards, stops what he's working on. He's working on one of his seminal works, The Freedom of the Will. And he stops that to edit David Brainerd's diary into a biography of David Brainerd. And so this biography that he works on ends up being his most popular work. His most reprinted work has been a continuous publication since it was written in the 1800s until today. And it inspires people like John Wesley, the great Methodist evangelist in England. It inspires people like Adoniram Judson, who's this great Baptist missionary to what is then Burma, present-day Myanmar. And so God uses Brainerd in his life, yes, to convert hundreds of people to his glory. And then God uses Brainerd's death. He died in the right place, in the right time, in the right way, to help save tens of thousands of people to God's glory. And so, what do we take away from this? Well, I think what we take away from this is that we don't need to be afraid. For those of us who have faith in Christ, we don't need to be afraid. That God is working things together in our lives for some larger purpose. And maybe we can't see it yet, and maybe we won't see it till the end of the age. And so we all have maybe this one thing, or maybe more than one thing, in my case, that we're afraid to lose. Maybe it's our career. Maybe it's our spouse, our friends, our status, our wealth, or our life. And there's something in life that makes us think, hey, if I didn't have that, I don't know how I could go on. And so I think the challenge, in part, is to identify that thing and then turn that thing over to God in prayer and pray the promises of God that he's given us back to him. Things like, hey, I know that you're in control, and I know that you're working all things together for my good. And I know that you're using difficulty and trials to refine me like gold in a fire. And you're preparing me for an eternal weight of glory. And I know that in you, I can find real satisfaction and contentment and rest for my soul. And I know that if you decide to take something away from me, that it's because you love me and you know what's best for me. And I know that I can mourn calamity as one who has a sort of steadfast and eternal hope in the promises that you'll recompense us 100-fold for everything we've lost. So please help me in my unbelief and give me the faith to see your priorities and build my life upon them and upon your promises. So that when the rain falls and the storms come and the wind blow and beat against the house of my life, that it won't fall because it's founded upon the sure and steadfast rock of your Son and its truth. And so that's what I think it means that Jesus is trusting. He knows that no matter what happens, a good God is in control. He's in control of the storm, and he's working together all these purposes for his good. And so that maybe that probably feels, maybe you feel a little left a little like under the pile. Like, okay, so pour out my life for the sake of the gospel, glorify God in my death. Okay, check, easy. But that's actually not the whole story. That's not, I think, what's being done here. So let's keep moving into what actually is the main focus of this text. Okay, and everything else is just prelude. This is not, the question that the disciples ask is not, who then is this that leaves the crowds to go across the sea? It's not, who then is this that is so calm that he's asleep in the storm? These are, to be sure, these are remarkable qualities about Jesus, and they're probably not shared by a lot of us, but they are by themselves like a stoicism, right? It's sort of grin and bear it. This is how life is. The question that they ask is, who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? And so the answer is that I think Jesus this is pointing us to the fact that Jesus is trustworthy. That even the wind and the sea obey him. And so I really want to highlight the extent of his mastery over the wind and the sea. Look at verse 39. He says, and he awoke, and he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. This is not like Storm from the X-Men using her superpowers to manipulate the weather. This is not Thor from Marvel, the god of thunder, calling down, thunder and storms with his superpowers. This is like the creator of all things, just saying, you're done, and it's stopping. As easily as if an author were to change the sentence in one of her stories with the stroke of a pen. That's how easily Jesus resolves this problem. And this is actually the first of 4 sort of Exodus-like miracles that we're going to see in the book of Mark. We have 2 water miracles, the calming of the storm and the walking on water. And then we have 2 bread miracles, the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000. And so these are sort of echoing God's greatest hits from the book of Exodus, that the parting of the Red Sea and providing manna to his people in the wilderness. It's highlighting God as protector and God as provider. And so one of the ways that the biblical authors highlight and demonstrate God's mastery over creation is through his mastery over water. And for us as Americans, or really just people living in the modern era, frankly, this doesn't really make as much sense to us because we have a sort of romanticized relationship with water. We're sort of a nautically inclined people. We have these great stories celebrating the adventure on the high seas. We have this great navy with these huge, massive floating fortresses that are essentially unsinkable. We fought and won all these great maritime battles. Like, the sea is like a cool place for us, but it's not a cool place for the Jews in Jesus' time. They're not a nautically inclined people. Even the nautically inclined people in Jesus' time frequently get shipwrecked, as we see in the book of Acts. They're not really a seafaring people. It's sort of an uncharted, scary place. It's very unpredictable, certainly uncontrollable. And they're not out there on the USS Nimitz, this great aircraft. They're out there in this little tiny fishing boat, that's getting blown around and like a storm comes up and it's sinking. And so for the first century Palestine, the seas are sort of a scary and a foreboding place. And to highlight God's mastery over the seas is to highlight his mastery over all things, I think. Which is incidentally, this is one of the reasons why in the book of Revelation, when it talks about there's no sea in the new heavens and the new earth, that's not to say there's no water probably. I think what it's highlighting is that this is another thing. The sea is a bad thing. You don't want that in your new heavens and your new earth. Okay. So in the beginning, God forms the water, he separates the water, he organizes the water, and he fills the water with life. And then in the flood, he cleanses the earth with water, and then he promises to Noah never to do it again. In Exodus, he breaks the will of Pharaoh with storms and water miracles, and then he crushes the might of the Egyptians by parting the Red Sea to deliver his people, and then collapsing it back in on the Egyptians. Even in the Psalms, just a couple of highlights from the Psalm. Psalm 89, verse 8 and 9. O God, O Lord God of hosts, who is mighty as you are, O Lord, with your faithfulness all around you. You rule the raging sea. When its waves rise, you still them. Or even a little more on the nose, Psalm 107, verse 28 through 30. Then they cry out to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storms still, and the waves were hushed, silenced. And then they were glad that the waters were quiet, and he brought them to the desired haven. And so the answer to this question in verse 41, who then is this that even the seas and the wind obey him, is I think that he's God. He's the creator of all things. He's the author of the story. He's the one who has mastery over the storms and the sea. And so the old category for the Messiah might be something like, well, the Messiah is a descendant of David. He's David's greater son. He's going to be like an even greater, warlord like David was. Maybe he'll be a wise sage like David, dispensing good advice, or like Solomon, about how to get by in the world. That's sort of the old category. And in this category, you're sort of teaching people how to cope with the world. Like, the basic line is what the Marlowe Stanfield, you want things to be one way, but they're the other way. You want so it's a very obscure Wire reference. I don't recommend watching it necessarily. It's a fantastic show. But you want the world to be a certain way, but it's not that way. The world is a separate way. And so you got to get with the program of the world. That's kind of what worldly advice looks like. Here's how the world really works. Conform your life to that world. It's sort of helping us grin and bear whatever the world throws at us, help us tolerate suffering because we're powerless over it. And the sooner we get on board with reality, the better things are going to be. That's the old category for what a great teacher looks like, for what a great ruler looks like. What's the new category? That's the not. What's the but? Well, the but is he's the living God. He's the King of Kings. He's the Lord of Lords. He's the one in whom we can trust. He's not teaching us how to create or to cope with reality. He's the master of reality. Not one hair will drop from our heads unless he consents to it. So he's the true God who condescended to become a human so that, what's the purpose of that? So that he could partake in our suffering and in our death. Why? So that he could deliver us from suffering and death. And so, in Isaiah 25, kind of talks about the promises of the new heavens and the new earth, and he talks about, hey, we'll feast with him on the feast of his rich food and his well-aged wine, which sounds kind of nice. But it gets better. He'll swallow up the veil of death that's spread across all nations, and he'll wipe away the tears from all our faces. And then we will say, behold, this is our God. We have waited for him, that he might save us. This is the Lord. We have waited for him. Let us be glad and rejoice in his salvation. So on the topic, I was just in, this is a good segue, I promise. I was just in New Mexico and Colorado for 2 weeks on vacation. And New Mexico and Colorado are high and they're dry. And so they're just sort of wreak havoc on the face area, particularly the inside of the face. And so one night, like last Wednesday, my tooth started hurting. And so I iced it, took some Advil, and by morning it was fine. Okay, so I was like, okay, well, not a big deal. A few days later, it comes back, it starts hurting again, but now it's sort of more in my face area. Like less in my tooth area, more in my face area. And so I'm on WebMD and I'm diagnosing myself. I have health insurance, but it's like, no. So I'm like, okay, what I've got is a sinus infection in my maxillary sinus, which is right there. It's a pretty good diagnosis if I do say so myself. It's not a big deal. It'll drain eventually. You let your body take care of it. Just give it 10 days is what WebMD told me. And so I'm there, and I'm popping Advil, and I'm using warm compresses, and I'm taking hot, steamy showers, and I'm like draining it with an Neti pot and all that stuff. And my face is not getting better, contrary to what they told me. My face is getting worse. My face is getting all swollen and puffy, and I look grotesque, as David can attest. And I'm sort of in constant pain at this point, around the clock. And so then on Thursday, a couple days ago, around noon, something starts going on with my gum. And so I'm like, okay, maybe this is not a sinus issue, which can make your teeth hurt from pressure. Maybe it's a tooth issue, actually, after all. And so I call my dentist, and no luck, they're going out of town. So I call some endodontist, which is like a tooth doctor that gets in there and does root canals, basically. And no luck, they're all whatever. So here's what I'm gonna do. I got one friend, he's a rich people endodontist. He's the kind of endodontist that when you go into his office, they say, do you want sparkling or still water? Okay, so I'm like, I gotta be safe, whatever, I'll call this guy up. And I'm like, I'm haggling with the office manager, hey, can you get me in? Yeah, whatever. She's like, well, tell you what, we can get you in today at 4:30, not to fix anything, but just to take a look. I'm like, great, so I'll know if this is a real issue or not that I need to worry about. And so it's 4:30 on a Thursday, which if you know things about dentists, that's like the last dentist that I'm gonna get for at least 3 days, anywhere in the United States of America. I'm getting there just to evaluate the issue. It's gonna be about $300, $400 just to evaluate the issue. They're gonna scan my face. And so I get in there, they scan my face, and what do they discover? Well, apparently I have severely infected what is called my canine space, which is right next to my maxillary sinus, but it's the part above your, that tooth. And the guy, not my friend, but his dental assistant says, hey, you shouldn't have waited this long. If you waited any longer, things would have gotten really serious. We could have had to replace the whole tooth, get you an implant, or it could have it goes up into your eye and then to your brain, maybe potentially. So it could have been very, very serious. And so my friend comes in and is like, all right, well, here's what we're gonna do. I'm like sitting in there, okay, my examination is done, now I know. He's like, nope, comes in here, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna drain it, we're gonna clean it out, we're gonna fill it with calcium hydroxide, which he describes as the A-bomb of disinfectant in my tooth. We're gonna fill it up, and then we're gonna come back in a week and we're gonna give you a root canal. And so bam, he's working on me, and he's like digging in his hands, and I'm looking at them, and they're like, so I had kind of shaky hands, whatever, too much caffeine. This guy's got rock solid hands. They're just totally still, totally rock solid, steady. And so he's digging around in my mouth, and he's poking holes in things and suctioning things out and drilling holes and stuff and stuffing things where things don't belong to be stuffed. And it's not really a pleasant experience for me at all, but it's this great joy knowing that he's healing me. It's not pleasant, let's be clear about that. And afterwards, my face is way more jacked up than it was. It's way bigger. This entire left side of my face is paralyzed, so I kind of have that Harrison Ford smile going, but it was also, I have faith that, seeing this guy's steady hands, and the fact that he's got sparkling and still water, that he probably knows what he's doing, and so I can trust in him. And so then we start talking about the bill. And he's like, well, whatever, we'll give you the friends and family discount. I've known you for a long time. And then it turns out insurance was going to take care of it anyway. And so I walk out of there without paying a dime. I go to the rich people endodontist and walk out without paying a dime, which is a great trade. And so this is sort of like the grace of God in the gospel. Okay, now we're coming to the real point. God is in some ways, okay, great. This metaphor does not stand on all fours, so don't take me to task over it. But he's like the skillful surgeon operating on a patient. And my best efforts, Advil, warm compresses, neti pots, whatever, didn't really do anything. They didn't do anything at all. And if anything, they made it worse. Like, hey, you have an infection, make it moist and hot. Keep your fever low. But he gets me in at 4:30 on a Thursday, and he scans my face, and then he just puts me in the chair. I don't even remember consenting to this medical procedure. He just puts me in the chair. This is serious enough, and he's going to town. It's weird and it's unpleasant, and I feel very helpless, as you always do at the dentist. But it's for my good. And so the next morning I wake up and I'm feeling great. My face is normal again for the most part. But that's not the end of the story, right? So that's sort of God's grace of justification in the gospel. That's why we can trust him, that he is the great surgeon of our souls. He's the great physician. But then there's an ongoing, the story goes on, right? The story goes on. It's going to be ongoing difficulty as well. I'm on antibiotics now, which are not good for you to take unless you have an infection. The rest of your body doesn't really like it. The infection hates it, which is great. But, and then I get to go back next week, and he gets to begin to do more good work on my face. And he gets to go in there and, drill some holes and take some stuff out that I would have liked to have kept if I could. And the root canal, if you've never had one, is pretty unpleasant. It's a pretty unpleasant experience. But I know, and I'm really joyful for next Thursday. I'm joyful to go into this very unpleasant experience because I know it is for my good. It's going to be for my good, and I have a great joy continuing, knowing that he's going to continue to heal me. This person who I trust, this reasonably good physician. He's no great physician, but he's a good physician, and I can trust him because I know of what he's done. I've seen the work he's done in the past. I've seen his steadfastness and his goodness towards me, and so I know that that I can trust him. And so if I'm not here next week, it's because I've died of a root canal. But so this is a quote from John Piper that I heard yesterday. I was just listening to a random sermon. And he says, our affliction, our suffering, is God's infirmary to heal us from the disease of worldliness and to fit us to marvel at Christ when he comes. Or to paraphrase it, right? The storms of life are God's dentist office to heal us from the disease of worldliness and to fit us to marvel at Christ when he comes. And so this final note about David Brainerd, you might think that David Brainerd was this guy who was just overflowing with enthusiasm and, but he's actually, his diary reveals, frequently depressed, and even to the point of being suicidal. And this is in an era before there was any real treatment for this, right? This is 1700s. It's a bad time to be depressed. And he didn't soldier on because he's full of energy and like rah confidence in his flesh. He continues to run the race well on the power supplied by his Savior. And he continues on trusting in his great King and his great God and the promises of his future grace. And so now David Brainerd is with God. And along with this great cloud of people that he helped convert, who are his witnesses to his faithful obedience and his trust in God. And so now that his story is over, it's pretty clear that David Brainerd made a pretty good trade. He traded this worldly, ephemeral life and comforts for the eternal comforts of God. And so the application for this text, I think, ultimately is not just, hey, go be like Jesus, go be a good missionary. It's not just, when the storms come, be very calm. It's trust in Jesus, this God-man whom even the wind and the sea obey. That we give up our small, self-centered ideas of who we want God to be. He's not just a useful tool to make us healthy, wealthy, and wise. He's not just a good networking tool. He's not just a sage who's giving us good advice on how to live our lives well and good, clean living. He's not here to serve us and to help us build our own little worldly kingdoms. That's not why God is here. We are here to serve him and to help him build his glorious eternal kingdom. And so the plea of this text would be to entrust yourself to this God, knowing that through his Son, he gives eternal life to all those who trust in him, all those who believe in him. And that he's completely in control of every single detail of your life, both the good things and the bad things, the joyful things and the sorrowful things. And that he's abounding in steadfast love towards you and toward all his people. And he's working out the details and all the details of our lives together for our good. And at the end of the age, when the curtain drops and the biblical drama is over, and all of our stories are over, and all of our stories are beginning anew, we will proclaim, together with all the saints, behold, this is our God. We have waited for him, that he might save us. This is the Lord. We have waited for him. Let us be glad and rejoice in his salvation. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for these profound truths about mission, about faith, about your faithfulness. We hope that you would help us to trust in you and to build our lives upon the gospel and the promise of your future grace. Please help us to break free from the slavery to worldly wisdom that says we need to build our own kingdoms and that success comes through self-determination. Make us foolish for you and for your mission and give us faith in your future deliverance. And most of all, let us be glad and rejoice in your salvation. And we pray these things in your Son's holy name. Amen.